Don't be fooled by the name. They call Australian rules football footy, which sounds cute and precious. But footy is a sport that makes American football look like a quilting bee. It's a game of almost cartoonishly violent collisions, without the benefit of pads. It features non-stop trash talk and is played on a field practically the size of a speedway. As the name does suggest, Australian rules football is the national sport down under, with games that draw 100,000 fans and TV audiences that, per capita, often outrate the NFL. So why in the name of Waltzing Matilda do crowds in Melbourne sometimes break into chants of USA, USA? The answer? They're cheering Mason Cox, a Texan who stands nearly 7 feet tall, ranks among the best footy players out there, and might be the most unlikely success story in global sports today.
The story will continue in a moment.
Sets it up. Cox again. I cannot believe it.
At first glance, anyway, Mason Cox comes across as the quintessential Aussie rules or AFL player. At age 32, he's logged almost 100 games over 8 seasons for the storied Collingwood Magpies, the AFL's equivalent of the Dallas Cowboys. And he is an evangelist for his sport, one played on an oval surface almost double the size of an NFL field. Footy entails players running about 10 miles a game, juking,
Double step from Mason.
tackling, passing by punching the ball, and scoring by kicking the ball through goalposts.
Bang!
6 points for splitting the center uprights, 1 point for the side ones.
Arms in the air. That has gone through.
It's unlike anything else you've ever seen. It's probably the roughest sport in the world, I'd say. It's a mix of basketball, football, it's a mix of soccer, cricket even. There's really no rules. It's a few sticks at each end, just try to kick it through those, and then whoever does that more than the other team wins.
Sounds like fun.
Yep.
For 3 straight goals, Mason Cox delivers.
Cox plays like a human blowtorch, not only catching and kicking, but mastering the art of the specky, a tactic that transforms an opponent's back into a stepladder. Yes, it's legal.
It is one of the major things of AFL that people look at and they go, oh my gosh, that is insanity. Right. To stick your knees on someone else's shoulder, launch yourself up to 15 feet in the air, take a grab, come down, and then be looking at this guy going, yep, I just literally jumped on top of you.
It's like getting dunked on.
Yeah, it's very similar.
Cox already a big target, and those are good hands.
But Mason Cox is the most unlikely player in the history of the sport. Never mind that at 6'11", he's the tallest player ever to suit up, or that he's the only American in the league. He lived the first 23 years of his life without knowing the sport of footy even existed. He may be an Aussie celebrity and may recently have starred in the AFL's equivalent of the Super Bowl, but is still mastering the sport's nuances. And he's still fuzzy on basic footy facts, as we observed at practice.
Kangaroo brand. What's this made out of?
Kangaroo skin.
That's
Pig skin.
Was it pig skin?
Pig skin, yeah.
Well, I should probably learn a few things.
So they say, kick the old pig skin.
Think they give him grief about that? You should hear them ribbing him about his accent. Here's Collingwood captain Darcy Moore.
He's kind of this weird fusion between southern drawl and Aussie accent.
That's an interesting mashup.
He definitely loves putting it on in the locker room, that's for sure, the Texas drawl.
He puts the Aussie on for us.
You think the football, made of cowhide by the way, travels in strange trajectories? Get a load of Cox's story.
What would you have said the odds of success were going to be?
You could comfortably say 1 in a million.
1 in a million.
Because there's so many talented players all around the country that just never make it. And the odds of succeeding are just it's so difficult. Like any professional sport, there are so many things seen and unseen that make it really hard to succeed.
No skills, no track record.
Yeah, no knowledge.
No knowledge.
Living, thousands of miles from home by himself, it's an extraordinary thing.
Home for Cox was suburban Dallas, where in high school he had to duck under doorways but played soccer, to the great annoyance of classmates who played hoops.
There's no way that he's not on the basketball team at 7 foot. What else could you possibly do at 7 feet tall other than play basketball, right? And Mason is a prime example that there's a whole possibility of things you can do at 7 foot.
That's Marcus Smart, now a Boston Celtics star, who went to high school with Cox.
You ever hear, height is wasted on the tall?
That's the old saying, you know, all his height was wasted on this tall dude for nothing. But as we've seen, it's not wasted at all.
After high school, Cox went to Oklahoma State, majoring in engineering. As a sophomore, he was approached about an unusual on-campus job, practicing with the women's basketball team and simulating tall opposing players, including Brittany Griner. When the men's team was short on height, they too called on Cox, which reunited him with Smart, then the team star.
Mason Cox back into the game.
A walk-on, Cox spent part of 3 seasons as the last option off the bench for OSU.
He says he did guard Embiid for a little bit.
He did guard Embiid for a little bit.
You remember that?
He was at KU. He did guard Embiid for a little bit.
Yes, when OSU once played Kansas, Cox matched up against Joel Embiid, now one of the NBA's best players. And Cox held his own.
He's always had a little spunk, a little fire to him. He had moments where, you know, you'd be like, Mason, like, it was like, wow, I didn't know you could, you know what I'm saying? I didn't know you had that in you. Like, is everything okay?
Know a little bit about being a physical athlete.
Just a little bit, just a little bit.
Shortly before graduating in 2014, Cox lined up a 6-figure engineering job at ExxonMobil. Then came an intriguing opportunity. A scout hunting for graduating college athletes contacted OSU to see if Cox might want to attend a combine in Los Angeles for this thing called AFL.
You never heard of it?
Oh, no, I'd never heard of it. Like, never once had a word had been spoken about it in my life. So we Googled it, as everyone does, and then this thing comes up, and it's like AFL's biggest hits. And it is literally people getting knocked unconscious.
And yet you go to this combine.
I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. I land in LA, I get picked up in an unmarked white van, thrown in the back, and he goes, we're gonna go to the hotel and we're gonna do 3 days of training.
Hand pass from Lester Smith to Matthews, who's steady, shoots it, goal!
If Americans know Aussie rules football at all, it's likely because in the 1980s, before it could afford NBA or NFL rights, ESPN aired AFL games. But the sport was founded in the 1800s as a way for cricketers to stay in shape in the off-season. It's especially popular in Melbourne, where the MCG, at nearly 100,000 capacity, the largest stadium in the Southern Hemisphere, will routinely fill for games. After the combine, Cox was summoned to Melbourne, where he impressed Australian coaches with his height and his surprising agility. Soon after, he declined his job at Exxon and signed with Collingwood.
We get the initial taste of what he's capable of. Can't kick, can't handball, but 7 foot tall.
Craig McRae is now the team's head coach. In 2014, he was the head of development and assigned to tutor Cox.
He'd finished college, he wanted to travel Europe, but he took the football with him. I get this video late at night of Mason kicking the ball in some forest in Scandinavia somewhere. And there's Mason running really awkwardly, carrying the ball like this, and then chopping the ball onto his foot. There was progression, but there's still a long way to go.
See what he does.
Cox approached his development like the engineer he was supposed to be.
And that's why they pay him the big bucks.
Making steady and deliberate progress, solving the physics of using his height as an advantage, not a liability.
Yes.
And he's doing all of this with guys that have been playing their whole lives.
Yeah, well, we grew up, sleeping with little footballs. We slept and breathed it and idolised the game. Mason had none of that.
What made you think he could pull it off?
He's got that chip that, hey, I'm going to prove a lot of people wrong.
Present!
Cox made his big league debut in April 2016 on the hallowed ground of the MCG, an annual rivalry game held on Anzac Day, a national holiday.
I remember sitting in this locker room just thinking to myself, holy smokes, like, this has happened pretty quickly. You're sitting here about to play in front of the most passionate fans probably in the world on one of the biggest days, and you barely know what the sport is. I still had questions on rules at that point. Like, I didn't 100% know what was going on.
He was standing arm in arm with his teammates when Australia's national anthem started.
I think to myself, I go, I don't know a word. And everyone else is belting them out next to me. So I kind of just laughed to myself and just kind of hum along. I had no idea. And that kind of took the nerves away.
That settled you, did?
That settled me.
The game started as if scripted. Cue the sports movie music. A ball spilled out. Darcy Moore got the ball and saw Cox in the distance and punted it to the rookie.
Well, this could be a fairy tale.
who caught it and scored with his very first kick.
And he rides it home. What a beauty.
Can you believe an American in his first game has just kicked the first goal on Anzac Day?
That day, I think, was one of those days that solidified that, this might be something I'm going to do for quite a long time.
Cox was literally off and running. His breakout performance 2 seasons later in the preliminary final, like the NFL's conference championship game, suggested he could be a star. Having crossed 15 time zones, Cox's parents were in the stands that day as he scored 3 times.
Can he guide it through? Yes, he can. 3 of the very best. It's one of the greatest stories, I reckon, in Australian football unfolding before our very eyes.
As Mason Cox became a fan favorite, he also developed into what locals would call a fair dinkum Aussie.
This country's really got my heart, I think.
I'm still marveling at your accent. Are you the most American Australian or the most Australian American?
Probably the most Australian American. I still love America. I'm still American, but I'm half and half now.
Flanked by his captain, his coach, and his parents, he got his Australian citizenship to prove it. And he's seen more of the country's exquisite landscape than most natives. But as in any sports movie, there were setbacks. In this play, he resembled a basketball player who headed down court forgetting to dribble.
He's gone! He's gone! Oh, boy!
When Cox was a rookie new to the sport, these bloopers were part of the novelty act.
Drops what he should have taken.
When Cox was a veteran, the passionate Collingwood fans were less forgiving.
You've seen that?
Yeah, the judgment, the criticism.
Adding injury to insult, in 2019, Cox was raked across the eye in a game and diagnosed with 2 torn retinas, leaving him temporarily blinded. That, he says, was when he felt the distance from home.
I'd lost one of my senses all within 48 hours. And had to figure out if I ever was going to play AFL again, if I was ever going to see again.
What's that internal conversation going like?
Did I do the right thing coming here? Now I have something that's probably going to affect me for the rest of my life. Was it worth it? And you feel quite isolated and alone.
Mason Cox.
6 surgeries later, he regained most of his vision, but was a diminished player, and the great American experiment looked to be fizzling. Then Cox made an equipment change, adding another distinguishing feature, becoming the first AFLer to wear prescription goggles. He had one of his best years. This year, Cox's coaches say he's never looked better.
That's pretty damn good.
I'm watching your practice thinking Americans would love this.
Oh, would go crazy for it.
So in 20 years, if there are a dozen Americans playing in the AFL, how's that go over with you?
I would love an American to break every single record I've done, because it means that I've left a mark,
You know how extraordinary and unlikely this story is.
I'm going to look back and think, you had the most ridiculous life you could possibly think of. That makes no sense. And I took it by the horns and I made the most of it.
Learn the rules, or lack thereof, of Australian rules football.
It's a chaotic sport that no one really knows about, bar Australia.
At 60minutesovertime.com.